shining a light on the science lurking behind the news.
We know lots of scientists and we're not afraid to call them up.
Unexpected Elements from the BBC World Service. Find it wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Welcome to The Inquiry with me, Tanya Beckett. One question, 4 expert witnesses, and an answer. If you have just eaten when you start listening to this documentary, there is a very small chance that that meal will have reached your stomach by the time we're done. And even when the food has reached your stomach and it's getting mashed up, it still has a long distance to travel and a lot of processes to go through before you find yourself making your way to the bathroom. We know that what we eat needs to nourish our bones, our muscles, our skin. But what about our brains? In the last decade, there's been a mass of research suggesting that what's going on in our intestine in some way relates to what's going on in our heads. So this week on The Inquiry, we're asking, what's wrong with our guts?
Part 1. How we stomach it.
If you ask multiple people, you will probably receive multiple definitions of what exactly the gut is. I like to think of the gut as the part of the body that participates in the digestion and absorption of food. So for me, the gut includes everything from the mouth to the anus, including all of the organs that secrete enzymes that aid in our digestion, such as the pancreas and the liver.
Our first expert witness is Jeff Predis, a gastroenterologist at Baylor College of Medicine at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. Gastroenterologists specialise in the disorders and diseases that affect our digestive system. That includes all the parts of our intestine between our mouth and anus and all other organs that help with digestion, such as the pancreas, liver, bile ducts and gallbladder. But for the purposes of this episode of The Inquiry, we're just going to focus on that windy pipe, which is several metres long and called the gut.
Every segment along the gastrointestinal tract has an important role to play. For example, the stomach is needed to grind up the food that we eat. The stomach adds acid to help with the breakdown of our diet. And then the stomach passes those contents on into the small intestine, where the majority of nutrient absorption occurs. The things that the small intestine does not absorb get pushed into the colon or the large intestine. And there, the majority of water is reabsorbed by the human body. And what's left becomes feces and is eliminated when it is convenient for us to do so.
So when it comes to breaking down food, it's the stomach that does the heavy lifting. And then, of course, we expel what is left. Hopefully when it is reasonably convenient to do so.
The gut must be able to move food that we consume forward along the gastrointestinal tract and ultimately eliminate this food as waste. This function is performed by coordinated efforts of muscles and nerves that all must squeeze and contract and push food and waste forward.
This all leads us to understand that the gut is far from being a dumb tube churning stuff up and sucking out what's necessary for us to survive. Nothing could be further from the truth. If it's pushing food along, then it must have plenty of muscles and nerves, and indeed it does. One of the other important functions that it performs is as part of our immune system. It keeps contained what we've ingested into our stomachs, but don't want to get out into the rest of our bodies, particularly if it might cause harm.
Some bacteria are known pathogens. In other words, they may specifically cause disease. They might make us sick. For some people, if the gut barrier becomes somewhat leaky, then microbes within our intestine, primarily within our colon, can then enter our body. And if these microbes leave the intestine, enter our body, they can make us very sick.
This means our digestive system is, in fact, an important guard against becoming ill.
Our gut has a very robust immune system within it. This immune system is absolutely critical. We swallow viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi all the time, and we don't often want these invaders entering our bodies. So our gut immune system is one of the first lines of defense to prevent these microbes from entering our bodies, from leaving the gastrointestinal tract, entering our bodies, and making us sick.
But this is where the gut can also get a little bit, well, over-involved.
On the flip side, however, if our gut immune system is overactive, this can lead to inflammation. And in certain cases, it can cause disorders such as inflammatory bowel diseases. And two of the most common forms of inflammatory bowel diseases are Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis.
Now, remember, we said that our intestine is highly innervated, so that means we can feel quite a lot of what is going on.
The gut and the brain are intimately connected through many, many routes of communication. The nerves that are embedded within the walls of our guts, for example, if we ingest something that does not sit well with our bodies and we feel bloated, we feel abdominal pain, that in turn can affect our psychological well-being as well.
We are then already very familiar with the idea that the brain is connected to the gut, and that the connection allows for the sending of signals in both directions. We can feel and experience it virtually on a daily basis. But research in recent years suggests that that communication channel is a lot busier than we thought.
Part 2. What happens in Vagus?
The vagus nerve is the longest sensory nerve between your brain, and it innervates all of your gut tissue and some other peripheral organs. It's bidirectional, which means the brain can send signals to your body, as well as it responds to what's going on.
Our second expert witness is a neuroscientist who examines the link between our gut and our mental health. What she is describing, the vagus nerve, is the superhighway of communication between our brain and our organs.
I'm Jane Foster. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center.
10 years ago, the University of California ran an experiment that was to change our understanding of just how profoundly our gut could influence our brains. A group of women drank fermented milk over a period of a few weeks. Scientists observed that when compared to a group that had drunk fresh milk and another that had drunk a placebo, their mind activity was improved. In fact, those particular regions that controlled the processing of emotion and sensation. This suggested there was a link between bacteria in our gut and the health of our brains.
And what they showed by doing imaging before and after 4 weeks of drinking this fermented milk that had probiotics in it was it changed the stress reactivity in their brain. And that really triggered a whole host of research into how is it that your gut microbes or your gut can influence your brain, as well as whether or not these, microbiome-related therapies might actually have an impact in areas of psychiatry where currently we don't have a lot of choices about how we treat people.
So, just to summarise, we've known for a very many years that stress can stimulate the bacteria in our gut and cause turmoil. What we now know is that if we don't have the right bacteria in our gut to start with, that can work the other way and affect the functioning of our brain. Jane's work focuses on the role a particular type of microbe plays with respect to anxiety.
And recently, by looking at the community of bacteria that's in the stool from a couple hundred depressed patients, we've actually been able to identify a community of bacteria in depressed individuals that is protective against anxiety, suggesting that perhaps something like anxious depression might have a bit of a different biological mechanism than standard depression. But also in individuals with anxious depression, we might now be able to start to tease apart, is their anxiety linked to their microbes, or is there something else driving their anxiety?
Teasing out the source of anxiety in any particular patient is, of course, a complicated task. But if we thought in some cases it might be down to the absence of a particular type of microbe, then would swallowing that microbe solve the problem?
Can we go one step further and can we correct it?
So it's possible that in some people, the depletion of those bacteria is related to their diet. But the important thing to note in that space is diet is often in the media and in some headlines suggested as the main factor of what's driving your microbiome. But some of the work I've done and quite a bit of work around the world demonstrates our own DNA we are born with also determines the bacteria are there. So that's why it's important for us to understand all of the factors.
Where we have got to, then, is that there is a link between the health of our brains and the types of microbes we have in our gut. What we're not clear about is if there's something going wrong with our microbes, whether it's our genes or our lifestyle.
We know everybody benefits from diet and exercise, but we don't know which people who have depression or anxiety are going to benefit in a way that's going to be a complete game changer for their treatment outcome.
And you would like to be able to identify those people?
I would like to be able to provide the information to the physicians so they could identify those people when they show up in their office.
Time for our next expert witness.
Part 3. Gut feelings.
So my general comment would be, if you buy a probiotic supplement, make sure that there is some science behind it.
We spend globally a massive $50 billion a year buying supplements for our digestive system. This is about the same as we spend on chocolate.
There's a whole world that lives in your belly, your gut microbiome.
Nos intestins jouent un rôle déterminant pour notre santé, en particulier grâce aux probiotiques qui les peuplent.
เต้าจุลินทรีย์ตัวที่ดีและโปรไบโอติกเสริมภูมิคุ้มกัน
Our third expert witness is a business development manager for Nizo Food Research in the Netherlands, Martin Ham.
Many people might not even have problems, but they just take it because they want to make sure that they keep on being healthy. And I also think there's a lot of people that think that they will improve their immune system. So it's a general feeling of taking care of your body. I think that's also not to be underestimated. A lot of people take supplements for the feeling of taking care of their body.
There are two types of supplement that have gained prominence recently. Probiotics, which contain microorganisms similar to those in our gut, and prebiotics, which are essentially fibres that feed the microbiome in our intestine. But in order to be effective, they need to be able to make the journey to the right place in the gut. And as far as we know, that place, broadly speaking, is the large intestine, and more precisely, the colon. So just to get a sense of how long that journey is, the small intestine, which comes before the large intestine, is 3.5 times the length of our bodies. It's a really long way for any supplement to travel before it has even a chance of working.
Because the stomach is the first step in food digestion. So it's a very harsh environment, and many bacteria might not even survive the gastric compartment. So again, larger functionality in the colon, but we also now have increasing evidence that the small intestine also has a microbiome and is also relevant for our health.
If they do make it through the pounding of the stomach, then through the small intestine, could they manage to reach the large intestine, or more specifically the colon, and have an effect?
How much proof is there that these probiotics work? Is that a difficult area?
It's a difficult area, to be honest. So we've done a lot of studies globally on the positive effects of probiotics and prebiotics. And we have demonstrated that there is a shift, let's say a favorable shift in the microbiome. So the good bacteria start to increase and maybe some baddies start to decrease. We also can demonstrate that there's a production of short-chain fatty acids, which are considered to be very important for maintaining a healthy gut. But that's not the same as demonstrating a health benefit.
If people felt that there was a problem with their gut that might be solved by taking supplements, probiotics or prebiotics, what would you advise them to look for when they're choosing these supplements?
You have to be sure that the probiotic bacteria will survive the gastric compartment and the small intestine, because they have to end up in the large intestine to be able to do what they're supposed to do. And we also know from some research that many of these probiotics get killed in the stomach already. So it's not like, okay, I can buy any product which claims to be a probiotic. You have to take the effort to at least look into the scientific evidence behind it.
So if we can't change our genes, and many of us don't like reading labels or lists of ingredients because it's exhausting, that leaves us with the option of re-examining our lifestyles.
Part 4. Dinner for two.
So in my mind, a healthy gut is covered in a lawn of multiple different types of microbes. There's a lot of focus on bacteria, and those are key, but there are also fungi present, viruses, and all of these microbes work as a community. So you could view it almost as a patchwork quilt, that every surface is covered with different collections of different groups. But they work together. They don't work independently. They work as communities. We depend on our gut microbiota for our very existence, actually. If we had no microbes in our gut, we would not live.
Our final expert witness specialises in research focused on gut pathogens, in particular E. coli, which we generally get from eating contaminated food. It's a pretty nasty bacteria and it causes diarrhoea. Gail Hecht is Professor of Medicine and Microbiology and Immunology at Loyola University in Chicago. With our microbiome or microbiota, as with any community, someone needs to do the maintenance to keep things ticking along.
We really rely on bacteria to keep us healthy, but our job is to feed those bacteria. And what do they eat? Well, they eat what I call our leftovers. So let's say we have beans for dinner, but there's a lot of fiber in beans and, other plants and plant products. It's the fiber that we as humans, if you would, can't break down. So that fiber makes it all the way to the colon where the bacteria live, and that's what they thrive on. Of course, one ramification of that is a byproduct of bacteria breaking down fiber is that they produce gas. So you might have flatulence after eating those beans, but I always rest assured as a gastroenterologist that it's a healthy sign that my microbiota are eating well, they're doing well, and I'm feeding them appropriately.
Well, I must remember to tell all of that to whoever is sitting next to me when I next eat beans. So why don't we experience all of that drama when we eat food that is processed?
They contain very little fiber, which is the food for your microbes, right? There's a lot of sugar. So simple sugars, glucose, we as humans absorb that right away. There's nothing left for the microbes. That's not the food for them. That's just something we like to eat. So if we don't think enough about not just what we need, protein for, building our muscles, glucose for energy, for our bodies, but beyond that, what else can we eat that, again, would nourish our microbiota? It's really like thinking of diets for two different groups, right? Ourselves and our microbes.
What might you do specifically for your microbes?
I would say an easy way is to think natural. fresh fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, anything in the plant family. And the more variety in the types of plants that you eat, the better, because we don't know every element that they need from these different foods, but we do know that a variety of different foods will nourish appropriately the different microbes in your gut. So the more natural, the better.
Remember all of those women from earlier who felt a whole lot happier after a few weeks of drinking fermented milk?
What about fermented food? Why has that become so fashionable?
Yeah, so fermented food contains bacteria. When you eat a fermented food, you're ingesting also those bacteria. So those are good. So for example, yogurt. Yogurt is a fermented food.
What it all comes down to then is that we need to eat to satisfy ourselves and our intestines, and these goals are not always completely aligned.
I think of it as feeding two entities. One I'll call myself, my human self, and the other my microbial self, if you would. So for my human self, I know I need to take certain nutrients in for energy so I can walk around, do my exercise, just survive, get by day to day. But I also need to be aware, and am aware, that I need to eat certain things that will make their way down to my colon, where most of the bacteria and other microbes live, and present them with their nutrients, which are things that I, myself, my body can't metabolize. So that would be complex carbohydrates or fiber.
Now we're coming to the end of our 23 minutes, and the food you ate before we started is a whole lot closer to entering that mashing chamber called your stomach. What we've discovered is that our gut has a complex microbiome, almost like a whole separate person. It needs to be diverse and it needs to be fed. It's becoming very clear there is a link between this microbiome and the health of our brains. Recently, scientists claim that people diagnosed with Alzheimer's, as well as obesity, diabetes, irritable bowel syndrome, even Parkinson's disease, have a less diverse gut microbiome compared to those without the disease. We don't know enough about the causal link, that is, whether the disease affects the microbiome or the microbiome causes the disease. But we're pretty sure that the next few years will shed much more light on what the consequences are of not trusting our gut. A final word from our fourth expert witness, who reminds us of the words of a famous ancient Greek physician.
Many people use this quote from Hippocrates that says all diseases begin in the gut. I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes some sense, right?
This episode of The Inquiry was presented by me, Tanya Beckett, produced by Louise Clark, researched by Matt Toulson, edited by Tom Bigwood, and mixed by Nikki Edwards.